first time Ireland have conceded first and won a game under Martin O'Neill, which is a notable statistic. The last time was Kazakhstan 2013 when Noel King was caretaker manager. So there has been a lot of late goals, but not to win a game having been behind.
Sports Star Sunday go with England. Kane and simple. Captain Harry leading from the front. England beat Nigeria 2-1 yesterday.
Is that even a pun? Kane and simple.
Kane and simple.
No.
Is that it?
Yeah.
No.
The Observer, they're going with Harry Kane again. Sharpshooter. Kane strikes again, but poor second half is a wake-up call for Southgate, is the Observer's version on events yesterday. And then your last two, we have the Sunday Times. They're going with Limerick and Cork as well. Cork pushed to the limit. Brilliant big picture there. 14-man Limerick snatch, last gasp draw. And then two interesting stories in the bottom of the Sunday Times. Pochettino, Spurs boss, keen to replace Zidane, is their line from Duncan Castles. Although it seems, according to various sources, that Real Madrid are looking at Daniel Levy, and they're looking at the fact that Pochettino has just signed a 5-year contract at White Hart Lane, and then they're looking back at Daniel Levy and they're thinking, this could be a month, maybe 2 months negotiating with this guy, and we still might not get our man. And interestingly, actually on The Sun, I neglected to mention Martin Lipton, who has very good contacts at Spurs. He has said that Real Madrid are gone cold on Pochettino because Daniel Levy's reputation goes before him, and they don't have very fond memories of negotiating with him over Gareth Bale some years ago. So it seems Pochettino absolutely wants to go, but Real Madrid aren't so sure they want to sit down with Daniel Levy for a couple of weeks. Maybe Pochettino can force the issue. That remains to be seen. And then final story is, oh sorry, I should mention also in the Sunday Times, Manchester United fans, you'll be interested. United are willing to pay Real Madrid's asking price. So it seems, for Gareth Bale that is of course, it seems the transfer fee will be 85 million sterling. Bale's now 28. And also it seems Manchester United are looking at the 500,000 sterling that Gareth Bale gets a week between image rights and bonuses and all this kind of stuff. And United are saying they're willing to pay it. 500 sterling a week.
Well, Sanchez is on 450 odd, isn't he?
Yeah,
so it's not that much
wages, more. Wages. We should no longer be amazed. You know, this is now the going rate for your blue chip players. What's Messi and Neymar are up 650, 700 grand territory. So
yeah,
Bale a bit miserly.
When I was younger, I used to listen to older people on the radio go, God, the money's gone crazy. But
you are that guy.
We all become our dads, don't we? We've now become that. We're that person. There's younger people going, get over it.
I know. This is standard.
It's almost a bit tedious when we start talking about it, isn't it? Because it's TV deals are so big now. That's just football inflation.
Say la
vie.
Yeah, I agree totally. Sunday Sport then. O'Neill delighted as Burke bags first Republic goal. And yeah, they mentioned it there. That's where I saw it. First League of Ireland player in 40 years to score for the senior side. And Munster Magic, Cork and Limerick in thrilling draw. I think everybody at this stage is just in full agreement that the round robin series are working brilliantly across both provinces, and they have a picture of Kyle Hayes there. And also at the bottom, hadn't seen this anywhere else, it could be elsewhere, I hadn't seen it. Ireland could face England in historic Lord's Test. It seems Ireland and England are looking at a Lord's Test next year.
Oddly though,
quite something.
It will allegedly only be a 4-day game, which is still sort of a semi-test, like a usual test. I mean, it would be unlikely, in all honesty, that it would go for 5 days anyway. So a 4-day fixture would probably be more interesting. But is it really a full test if you're only playing in a kind of a secondary format? Ireland played 4-day games against the likes of Afghanistan and Sri Lanka and stuff for donkey's years, and it was never really considered a test. So it seems like a weird cop-out almost on England's behalf to offer a test, but still only to make it a 4-day game. Okay,
an amendment then to the Sunday Independent story. Proposed test slammed as weird cop-out.
Yes.
Is what we're saying here.
By non-sports journalists.
So what, says Gav Reilly to Lord's Test. That's our new headline. So let's start with the Ireland-USA coverage. It's not exactly everywhere, Dan, but you were at the game, and I'm curious to know if the coverage matches up to what you felt about the game.
I think, to be fair, as I said, at 8:08 p.m. kick-off, the extra 8 minutes for US TV, and Sunday morning deadlines are... or Saturday evening deadlines are pretty early for papers, so it's hard really for them to go into it in much depth, particularly when the story changed a bit, as the game went on. Like at half-time, I mean, I was just reading I think it was Paul Rowan's report in the Sunday Times, and quite naturally, like, without getting into the finer points of like newspaper production, which might bore people, but I mean, if they were losing at half-time, and at that point, I was thinking if I was doing a report piece, you would be going into another set-piece concession, a winless run stretching back to last October, maybe a slightly disappointing crowd, and if it sort of proceeded to be a flat defeat after that, there might have been a very different tone to the coverage. But then the second half happens and there's all these feel-good stories, and I think, across the papers, I mean, you had a choice, because Graham Burke, obviously the first League of Ireland player since '78 to score. You had Alan Judge scoring after 2 years of absolute hell. Like, his career was on an upward curve until his leg was broken 2 months before Euro 2016. So, like, he scored a goal last night. I mean, he hasn't scored, I don't think, for Brentford since he's come back. He hasn't even really got to the level, to be honest. And he came on with 2 minutes to go and scores. So that's a good story. It gives people options. There's the John O'Shea goodbye angle. There's even smaller stuff. Darragh Lenihan, first Meath man, which to get on the pitch, which Gavin will like, and a few other new caps. So, I mean, there's obviously been a lot of late rewrites across the pages. So, I mean, across the various papers, there is, in terms of the coverage, it's just more standard report stuff, player ratings. I think, in fairness, the Sun sort of seemed to get a bit more Martin O'Neill afterwards in. And something that I think might be more prominent on Monday was just how good Declan Rice was. And after the game, when Martin O'Neill came in, as much as there was stories about Graham Burke and Judge and the various characters, he brought up Declan Rice himself, the outstanding Declan Rice. The one thing I learned from this game is that Rice is probably the most outstanding player on the pitch, and that was his main message that he wanted to get out afterwards, I feel.
Because he did say on Air Sport, they asked him towards the end of a lengthy enough interview actually on the TV about Rice, and that was when he came alive a little bit and said outstanding.
Yeah.
He used the word outstanding in a very
several times
deliberate way. So it's interesting he went into the print and said it too.
Oh, he almost brought it up himself, I think, as much as that maybe it was in his mind. But
maybe he's trying to shape the narrative a bit, because he's been quite negative in recent times. He's been, even after the Stade de France. And you can't quibble with the content of what he's saying. It's just whether or not he should be the one saying it. But he's basically saying, look, championship players, and this is the gap, and this is what I'm working with. So, I don't know, maybe on some level he's decided to actually accentuate some positives.
I'm not sure if that's the case, really, because, he was asked about Graham Burke, which was a kind of positive story, and it was sort of critical enough maybe of how he played in the game, or maybe he's critical the wrong word, but he was almost trying to deflate any sense of let's not get carried away here, and felt that the game passed him by a bit.
Fair point. He did that on the TV as well.
Yeah, and that has drawn a bit of a negative reaction sort of from some people. And I mean, I think it's more so that he just loves Declan Rice, rather than saying I'm going to go out of my way to as you say, shape some kind of narrative. I think it's just, in fairness, that's just how he feels.
The Sin, though, in their player ratings has given both Declan Rice and Graham Burke 8 out of 10. Which is probably telling you about the level of distraction and position they had.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I mean,
can I ask you? I
don't think Graham Burke would be. I don't think it was an 8 out of 10
I don't
performance,
think so.
but I thought he did quite well. I don't think he.
Is this though where we have an Irish film comes out and it's guaranteed at least 3 stars if it's no good? Like, are we like? I watched the game and thought Graham Burke was quite good, but I would agree with O'Neill's sentiment that he has to do more to justify being in the Irish team going forward. Like, I think if people didn't see the game on Air Sport and they might see the coverage, they might think, God, have we unearthed something really special here? And I think that would be unfair to Burke to overstate that. And I think Martin O'Neill was probably quite right not to say, we've got something, we've got a gem here.
Yeah, he just, but I mean, I sort of broadly agree with sort of the first premise, what you're saying, that, but I don't think there's been the same. I have to say, I don't think there's been like an amazing hype around Graham Burke and people saying he needs to be in the side. Like, I don't really think that's been out there. Maybe it would have been stronger about maybe Daryl Horgan for a competitive game in Austria in terms of a League of Ireland player at that point than it has been around Burke. I mean, I was obviously very interested in Burke last night, and I think people who know Graham Burke and watch him regularly could see actually that there was long periods of time when he was calling out for the ball and wasn't getting it. He was taking up positions, and he ended up playing in the front two with John Walters, and they weren't really matched in some ways, because Walters is trying to be strong, hold the ball up, and nearly wanting someone to sort of run off him and sort of anticipate his flicks. That's not Burke's game. He's not a number 9 who sort of runs on and gets behind defences with his pace. He was someone who you could see, I was almost keeping an eye on him most of the time to see how he wanted to get on, and my personal feeling was yeah, he did well every time he got the ball. He tried to use it sensibly, sometimes even a bit safe in what he did. Did nothing wrong. Didn't really impact the game like he could have. And in the circumstances, given it's his first start, he did find a sort of a nice 7 out of 10. I thought some of O'Neill's comments afterwards were a small bit harsh, because I don't think any problems that Burke had were because of his deficiencies. I think it was just that the way the game was played didn't necessarily suit him.
The people who struck me has been very good. I'm just looking at the ratings here in, I think it's the Sunday Independent.
Yeah.
Declan Rice gets an 8. Callum O'Dowda gets a 7. I thought O'Dowda was really, really good as well. Really composed, tries to do the right thing.
He's positive.
Technical ability. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. He played in the midfield 3 in Paris and actually gave the ball away at times.
I didn't see that game.
I just sort of watching back to see at times, tried a little flick, and it's like he's more of a winger. So in a central position, he can't really do that. Whereas against a slightly inferior opponent, what O'Neill likes about him, he speaks about, he always goes back to this. We want someone to drive forward with the ball from midfield, and he sometimes, that's when he's met with questions about why is the team director so slow or whatever it might be. He says, well, we need players who can take control of the situation themselves, and he likes that with O'Dowda, that he can break. But I'm not sure. I'm still not 100% convinced that O'Dowda centrally is the way to go longer term against a better team. But you never know. There could be that mix with Rice, who, I mean, Rice was very good and very much involved. And maybe if you have Rice and Hendrick was maybe a bit disappointing, but if you had Rice and Hendrick, maybe you can find room for someone like O'Dowda in there. He certainly rates him highly. I mean, you forget almost he started him in the first leg in Denmark. So, like, this is a player who will play more games than he doesn't.
Well, I was saying to Dave, not to labour the point or repeat it overly, but in short, Rice will do something which a lot of our midfielders don't, which is when the ball's fed into him, his instinct is not to take a touch back goal side and play it safely back to whoever gave him the ball. It's to get turned, and you'll see him, he did it in the other games as well, so it's a trend. He will turn on the ball and actually will carry it forward. I mean, it's rare to see a central midfielder even dribbling.
We don't do
it's
progressive central midfielders really much anymore.
So that's really positive. I thought Darragh Lennon was very good as well. Any aspects of the coverage grab you?
No, just only myself and Dan were talking outside about whether the 3-5-2 experiment might be something that then bleeds into the next competitive games, and I'm not entirely sure that maybe we have the central defenders, especially now with John O'Shea quite literally off the pitch, that we do that. But Dan reckons that it could be something that might be progressed.
Maybe,
if it's a way of getting 2 men up front.
I think to address the goal scoring problem, he sometimes speaks about, well, maybe get 2 strikers on the pitch, and this might be a system that does it. But I think there's a couple of debates around it. I think actually defensively, sort of 3 central defenders, we actually have reasonably good options with Duffy and Kieran Clark and Kevin Long. We could probably do that part of it. But it's who plays the wing. Is Coleman at right wing back? Is that the best use of him? McLean at left wing back. McLean hasn't I don't think that really. You would think that it should with some of the attributes that he has, and he's so athletic. But I'm not sure if it's necessarily really that utilises him best. But I wouldn't rule out Ireland doing it. You can argue with 3 at the back that would you want Rice to be one of the 3 because he can then get the team playing.
I think we need him in midfield.
But that's what I think. I think, and Gavin just mentioned it briefly outside. Will Rice play in a qualifier? I think Rice will play every game now.
I think he's now close to first name.
I think they will look at Rice and figure out, rather than where we fit Declan Rice into the team, it's more a case of Rice is in the side and
how do we get him on the ball? How do we build around him?
And it's a lot of pressure, and you keep saying it's not fair. He's 19. He could well have an awkward second season next year, like so many do, and then there'll be a sense of what's happened to Declan Rice, because he's the only one. But at the same time, when you see him play in such a way that he's looking more composed than lads that are 6-7 years and older and have played in major tournaments, you're thinking, maybe we should get a small bit excited.
But if we're doing 3-5-2 and we're doing it to get 2 strikers, though, I'm guessing from your take of it, Dan, that you don't think Burke and Walters are the 2.
No, Burke isn't. Let's just, and we got to move on here with time. I think we're exaggerating the Burke thing. I think it was very good and positive for him, but I don't think he's going to be a starter for Ireland.
No, he's not going to be a starter now. But I mean, at the same time, you might have said the same about Sean Maguire a year ago. We'll have to see where his career goes in the meantime. But I mean, the thing is, we're so light on striking options that you actually can't dismiss it completely. because you could be 2 or 3 injuries away. You know, there's Sean Maguire, there's Scott Hogan, there's Johnny Walters, there's Shane Long.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
Paul O'Gorman on Facebook. Dan, spot on Rio O'Neill's comments. First thing I thought was that Burke's movement was great and he did what he haven't done in many matches, what we haven't done in many matches, kept the ball, recycled it well. Is he commenting? Just one last quick line on all the football coverage then is Stephen Hunt caught your eye?
Well, yeah, Stephen Hunt has a sort of a column in the Sunday Indo which touches on a couple of topics. Again, because I probably wanted to update it to get a bit of last night's game into it, so there might well have been an earlier edition without this. I'm not entirely sure, but a bit of World Cup chat where I just mentioned he made the line at some stage that, let's be honest, the majority of Ireland fans will want England to do well in the World Cup, but they won't admit it.
Discuss.
I'm not convinced about that theory. I mean, I'd sort of take the point that the competition is more interesting for a lot of Irish fans with England are in it. I totally agree with that.
How well do you want England to do?
How well do I want England to do? Well, you see, I don't know. I've a slightly vested interest.
Just answer the question.
Because I'm over there. Well, I mean, I can't say I'd want them to win it, Joe. You know, like I'm not sure how I feel about that premise. Like it doesn't really like fill me with enthusiasm, that prospect.
Are you a secret England supporter, Gav? Make sure you catch their matches.
I would certainly watch their matches. They'd be the first ones on the shopping list of games that I'd want to watch. I think I'd probably qualify by saying I'd want the English players to do well, but not necessarily the England team, just because they would be so insufferable if they were to fall over the line. But I think it's. I've often found it a bit tedious that people who will spend their whole Septembers, Octobers, Novembers going over to Anfield or Old Trafford or the Emirates or Stamford Bridge or wherever it would be, would suddenly then see those players in a different coloured shirt and suddenly be appalled at the idea that they might succeed. And I think, in all honesty, it's dare I say, it's looking like something of a golden generation with the quality of young player that England's producing now. So, to be honest, I don't think it's all beyond the realms of possibility. They could do very well. I did one of those online simulators the other day where you predict the group winners and second places and then do all the knockouts, and I managed to stumble onto an England-Germany final, which I would definitely tune in for.
Well, I would tune in for that. So we have lots of stuff to get to. I mean, stuff I've jotted down here, and hopefully we get to it all. We'll come to Paul Kimmage in just 1 second. John Green is a good piece as well on the testing situation in GA and the GPA stance on it. Dermot Gleeson is a lovely anecdote. And on the rugby front, there's Brendan Fanning, Neil Francis. There's a great piece with Ollie Campbell. You like Damon Sweeney on Ramos on the back page, Dan. There's David Walsh on Abramovich. There's Ian Hawkeye on Zidane. There's an interview with the Pro 14 CEO in the Sunday Business Post. And we have 3 medal winners from 78, including Villa and Ozzy Ardiles, with Rob Draper in the Mail. They're just some of the things we want to get to. We'll do our best to get to them. It's unlikely, so we'll be brief and to the point, which presents a semi-problem with Paul Kimmage's piece because it's very big for a start. This is page 2 and 3, right across the Sunday Independent. It's a story I'd say most people were and are completely unaware of. It concerns O'Dwyer's GAA club. A curious way to do business is the headline. The subhead then, a confidential line that nobody knows about, a cheque for 20 grand that nobody will speak about, and some unanswered questions for the GAA, ... So this is a very local story concerning O'Dwyer's club.
Yes.
Do you want to try and surmise, if you had to, say you were doing a front page co-piece
in as best as you could summarise this piece, which I think is somewhere probably between 2,500 and 3,000 words, so it's very difficult to
more than that.
think it's more?
I'd say it's comfortably more than that, yeah.
Effectively, the nub of it appears to be the suggestion or implication or allegation that in the course of a civil defamation case, in which the defendant was the chairman of O'Dwyer's GA club in Balbriggan in North Dublin, that there may have been some other outside party, possibly sanctioned by Croke Park, which footed the compensation bill on behalf of this chairman. And Paul Kimmage is asking some fairly pertinent and justified questions as to whether it is in fact the case that Croke Park, formally or informally, managed to sanction some sort of private payment. What's interesting is that this was entirely a civil case done by a former underage coach against the club chairman, who says that he was defamed because the suggestion was wrongly put out that he had had inappropriate physical contact with children, when in fact the simple case was that he had carried a young player off the pitch, and that appears to be all there was to it.
And he carried the young player off the pitch a matter of metres in front of the player's father.
Yes.
The game was restarting. The player was
in full supervision, with no suggestion of anything untoward at all.
Absolutely. The game was restarting. The 5-year-old was having a tantrum, as 5-year-olds can do. He said, "Come on, we've got to start the game." And the 5-year-old's father he picked him up and brought him to the sideline, and it seems there was no issue. And this was only brought up by the chairman
yes,
2 years
subsequently
later.
afterwards, this person who was the under-13s hurling coach at the time, later on he won a county championship, but then shortly afterwards was disposed of as the coach for that underage group of players. The rationale apparently given and publicly professed was that it was because he had had inappropriate contact with this young player, obviously, which didn't amount to very much at all. A civil case was subsequently taken where this coach sued the club chairman in a private capacity.
And sorry to interrupt, that was because this coach, who had been coaching for a number of years, 8 years I think, very successful couple of years, they take the job off him, which it seems the parents and the players didn't want, and they weren't exactly sure why it had happened or what the procedures had been.
And he was, by an objective measure, the most successful underage coach they'd ever had.
Now again,
we're getting championship.
I'm just conscious with all of this.
Sure.
We're getting a specific version of a case, and I guarantee you, if you went into the club, you'd get 20 different people telling you 20 different things, and that is always the tricky aspect. But it seems, anyway, he was removed as coach. It wasn't entirely clear why. A couple of years later, it's brought up that he lifted the 5-year-old off the pitch. That reason is deemed to be crazy. Like one parent, it seems, at the meeting said it was a... I don't want to I'm going to get the parent... Well, one of the parents, anyway, objects when that is brought up. Oh, yeah, so for what reason... was he dismissed, Chairman? 2 years ago, he inappropriately laid his hand on a child. Parent, that statement's wholly inappropriate. This is a meeting. It's disgraceful. You should be ashamed of yourself. And so that was the issue. And then it seems the parents and the children didn't want him to go. And so, but for saying that about the coach, that he inappropriately laid his hand on a child, the civil suit happens. The coach doesn't want it to go against the club. He wants it to go specifically against the chairman.
Yes.
He wins that case.
Yes. And as part of that case, part of the agreed settlement of that case, the club chairman was supposed to read a statement at the outset of an AGM. It is claimed in this piece, and the club chairman has turned down his right of reply, so we don't know what he ultimately thinks about it, but it's claimed in the piece that he actually broke the terms of the settlement by suggesting that the club were involved in the arrangements, which the coach says is not the case. And ultimately what makes it quite interesting but also quite complex is that there's a suggestion of some involvement in a GAA company or charity called Speak Out, which is supposed to be a confidential reporting line for stuff along these lines. And there's also personal first-hand involvement on the part of Tom Ryan, who is now the Director General of the GAA, who apparently had direct contact with some of the individuals involved, and that in turn raises its own questions, because why would the person at the very top of the administrative tree be getting involved in something which A, is apparently nothing to do with the GAA because it's a private civil case, and secondly, if it was something to do with the GAA, then why would it have gone straight to the guy who's at the top of the tree or who was Director of Finance at the time instead of through county or provincial boards and everything else? So it seems there are certain parts of it which are too nuanced to try and tease out in the time that we have available, but there are lingering suggestions that in fact certain good processes have been bypassed. The suggestion, or certainly an implication, that the settlement was ultimately paid for by a cheque which is photographed, which is paid for by a private company, and it says on behalf of Cumann Lucas Scale, which obviously the GAA should not be having any part in that settlement because it was a civil case involving a guy in a personal capacity. And there's just lots of unanswered questions and suggestions of standards other than the highest possible standards. And for the second time in a couple of weeks that Paul has done a big deep dive into something like this, which you're reminded of the Patrick Kavanagh line that he made the Iliad from such a local row, but it's a local row with national figures getting involved in.
The local and the specific is always universal, and there's GAA clubs up and down the country, and I guarantee you, despite, like sometimes Brolly talks about the club and it's all wonderful at the club, and actually it's full of the same petty behaviours and rivalries and ego and power trips that happen at the very top level as well. Yeah. So on the one hand, it's incredibly local. On the other hand, there are some bigger issues, I suppose, for the GAA, like for instance, the 20 grand for the damages. So that was paid for by a company called Garwin Ireland Limited for Cumann Lucas Scale.
I've looked up and they seem to be involved in the insurance business, but I've no way of knowing whether or not in fact the GAA is a client of theirs or what the relationship is. But
so maybe that should be clarified by the GAA. They finish off the piece with a number of questions, and I think people, if they're interested in this, we might begin to wrap it up, but if people are interested, they can read the piece themselves, because it's very hard for us to get everything across.
That is the point. Like this is a complicated detailed piece that's been written in such a way that you need to almost seek it out and read it from start to finish.
But some questions: who are Speak Out, this confidential helpline? They're very hard to find online, and why, when Speak Out were called, did Tom Ryan, the director of finance, why did it go from Speak Out to his desk?
Yes.
There also seem to be issues in a number of instances where parents make complaints about things, and once they need to go beyond the club because they don't feel the club are handling it correctly, there seems to be a bit of a vacuum. That's a broad way of saying, like, who do we go to? We're not getting responses. That's a bit of an issue, maybe. And so the questions the Sunday Independent ask: who are Speak Out? Why did Tom Ryan, the then Director of Finance, respond to a call made to a confidential line? How many checks for defamation cases have Garwin written on behalf of the GAA? Who signs off on these payments at the GAA? It seems they tried to discuss things with the communications office in the GAA and to speak to Tom Ryan as well, to not much avail. So there's a question mark.
It is worth just pointing out, and sorry to interrupt you, Dan, just that in case people might not have read this whole thing and they might think that it's all a bit conceptual, or that it doesn't have any real manifestation on the ground. Ultimately, you have an under-13 county champion panel for whom loads of kids are being withdrawn and transferring either to Fingalians or over the border to Stamullen in County Meath. So actually what you have is that the real world manifestation of this is not just that adults are fighting, it's that a very promising underage hurling squad is broken up with half of the players either deeming themselves unfit to play or transferring clubs, but that it does ultimately mean that a very promising, bright young squad is effectively broken up as a result of this.
It'd be interesting to see, like, is there a follow-up to this, because Paul did a piece a couple of weeks back related to a club in Galway. And obviously just when such a great amount of work has gone into something like this, and he obviously is sort of privy to like huge aspects of detail that, for other, say, publications and stations to follow it up when they may not have that detail can be slightly difficult. And yet it seems like there's hugely valid questions that have been raised here. So again, interested to see if this is just like a two-page feature that stands alone, or does this become a talking point in the coming days when actually a lot of eyes and minds are engaged in sort of GAA games, in terms of whether this story just sits there and that's it, or whether it leads to any broader discussion.
Yeah, I think it won't lead to much discussion.
That would be my instinct, possibly.
Personally,
as well.
It's a very difficult
That would be instinct, but
topic.
Whether that's right or wrong, it seems like there's questions that should be answered, but I'm not convinced that it will lead to.
I
suspect on the practical level,
Paul may follow up on it.
Yeah, I suspect he will, particularly if no one else does.
On a practical level, it's just very difficult for someone else to follow up, because now to follow it up assumes so much prior knowledge that you would need another 2,000 words.
That's the challenge
first.
Yeah. So that's on page 2 and 3. It's certainly a very different story. There's nothing else like it in the papers this afternoon. And just to round off a GAA story that caught our eye, John Green on page 6 of the Sunday Independent is just making some arguments. I think most people share his view on the GPA and the testing rules. So his headline is: GPA should set example and play by same rules as everybody else. He describes the GPA throwing their toys out of the pram over Sport Ireland's decision not to pay government grants due to players until they sign up fully to the anti-doping programme. The crux of the issue seems that the Irish anti-doping people want the home addresses of all players. They may not turn up at these homes. They may, certainly that's TBC. And Dr. Una May, head of Sport Ireland's anti-doping committee, said this is standard practice for all athletes who receive state funding. And Hickey of the GPA said inter-county players are amateur. They spend on average 40 hours a week at their inter-county commitments, another 35 hours either working or studying. So any new requirements of them will need to be agreed in advance. It seems this had been arranged in December, but the GPA are saying this was just thrown upon them. Green argues the players are in receipt of taxpayers' money. The amount ranges from €700 to €1,700. Sums involved are irrelevant, though, because public money comes with terms and conditions. And Dr. May says, it's never been our intention to make home testing a routine part of our programme, but we have the right to test players in any sport, in any environment. And John quotes, on Twitter, Colin Griffin, an Olympian: most athletes in Olympic sport may lead a professional lifestyle, but very few are paid professionals. Many also combine work, study, family, and still get tested at home. Inconvenient, but necessary for credibility of their sport and their performance. It strikes me, looking at this, that the GPA don't have much of a foot to stand on when other effectively amateur athletes, Olympians, have signed up to this, when they're getting public money. I mean, look at the country. Public money is very valuable. We're talking about 6.9 million here.
Yeah.
It's like it's not nothing.
No.
I don't know what the GPA are playing at here, really.
No, it's not a good look as well, because when you're talking about something like, an anti-doping program, if you're seen to be resistant in any way to something, as some valid points contained within about, of course, the working lives of these people, but as you say, you want people to be fully bought into the integrity of what they're watching, because as much as players may be amateur, the GEA is still it still makes a lot of money for people. It's a sort of a lucrative association in terms of the amount of cash it generates, and it can lead to very good stuff for players. So, as you mentioned, I don't see what's the problem. I appreciate the players being a bit miffed if their lives are being upset by people coming to do stuff, but this is part of the trade-off, for what you get.
I think as well, it's not like they're going to be tested at home every second week.
No, it's just
the reality is the vast majority of them will never get that knock on the door. It's almost
training.
It's a weapon in any good anti-doping program. One of your greatest weapons is the threat of the knock on the door, especially out of competition.
Or at least the element of surprise.
Precisely.
Anyway, yeah.
So it's that it could happen at any time, and if you were of a mind to do something, and I don't think, but who knows, I don't think there is a big issue in the GAA, but if you were ever of a mind to think to do something, the fact that, well, at any moment I could get a knock on the door, even in this week where I'm doing this cycle of whatever I'm choosing to do, that's a big deterrent. So if you don't have that in your armoury as an anti-doping programme, then you have very, very little.
I would agree.
The only thing that I don't know whether it's an omission or whether it's just the case, but that in often cases, professional sports people, they effectively have to give WADA or the National Anti-Doping Agency, they effectively have to give them a diary of where they're going to be at all times. And maybe they feel that for a GA athlete that's a little bit of a step too far. But just on the point,
but I don't think they have to do that. I think they just need to furnish them with their home address.
And surely if they know what nights of the week they're going to be training, then they know where they can find them.
Do they still have training bans? Could that be a problem? I won't be training.
You
here.
can't test them in November and December.
Half the country apparently has been investigated for breaking the training bans.
What are your movements going to be this week? Just go and do the shopping for 3 hours there.
There'll just be 36 of us all independently in the gym at the same time. Just on your point, though, about how public money is still at a premium, and it's worth pointing out, and it's a point that John makes as well, is that even our more celebrated amateur athletes like the O'Donovan brothers, there are 3 World Cup rowing regattas this year, and Rowing Ireland only have money to send crews to 2 of them, which means that there is one coming up in Austria at the end of this month, and apparently, according to the Southern Star newspaper, the brothers are going to have to beg, borrow or steal a boat to compete. And then not only that, once they even get hold of a boat, they're going to have to pay their own way to get there as well, which just only goes to highlight, even for our most successful and celebrated amateur athletes, that money is not easily found.
No, and when you look at the money being spent on each individual inter-county team, they are quite well looked after, and maybe they don't fully appreciate what Olympians are going through.
That's fair, yeah.
I really do think
they don't.
This has been quite a heavy paper review thus far. I'm going to lighten the mood somewhat. I really enjoyed on page 13 Ollie Campbell. I thought this was really good. This is Peter O'Reilly, and so
Sunday Times.
Sunday Times. Ireland are obviously on their way, or they've arrived now actually down in Australia, and Ireland's tour to Australia in 1979 is quite famous for various reasons. Not least, they won the 2 tests, and since then we are 0 for 10. And it was the first Northern Hemisphere side to go and win in the Southern Hemisphere, which was a big deal. But it's remembered, and 39 years ago today, by the way, is when the first test happened. But people of a slightly older vintage will remember it as the time that Ollie Campbell replaced Tony Ward in the team. And so O'Reilly has sat down with Campbell. He says, Ward's omission probably still counts, this is Peter O'Reilly, not Ollie Campbell, Ward's omission probably still counts as Irish rugby's greatest controversy. Not convinced? Try the front page of the Irish Press, above the fold, remembering that rugby in Ireland in the late 1970s was what we would now call niche. The headline, Dismay at dropping of Tony Ward. O'Reilly continues, even the news that Pope John Paul II would be visiting the country was relegated to page 2. David Brookoff, the Wallabies coach, said, it's absolutely staggering. Ned Van Especk in the Times said, Ireland can still beat Australia in spite of Ward's absence. And Ollie Campbell talks about, in my wallet, I have a ticket for 2 all expenses, for an all expenses paid trip around the world for the first person I meet who doesn't mention the name Tony Ward. I'm perfectly serious. People have gone very close on occasion. You can be chatting for half an hour, and then just as they're leaving, they can't help themselves. It's, do you see much of Wardy? They'll ask. Ward, of course, was a European Player of the Year going out there. Campbell had 1 cap to his name against Australia 3 years previously, where he had missed all 4 kicks. He was seen as lucky to go on the tour, and Ward is like the poster boy of Irish rugby. And even he was in here a while back, Tony Ward, for his autobiography, being interviewed about it, and was still like quite sore about the decision. But Campbell goes in and they win the series 2-0. And this is a very good Australian side. They'd beaten the All Blacks 30-16 in Auckland very recently. So he kicked all 18 points in the 18-15 victory. And then in the second test as well, he kicked all 9 points. They win the test 2-0. And O'Reilly writes, for the Wardites, it was never enough though. 1979 paved the way for, it was never enough even that 1979 paved the way for Ireland's Triple Crown, when again Campbell thrived. And Campbell was a first-choice Lions pick, 1980-1983. Ward is still deemed by many to have been harshly treated. And Campbell is just talking about how they're forever linked. He can't go anywhere without Tony Ward being spoken of. I think it's a really good piece.
Yeah,
it's a really nice
there's
piece.
One very nice bit at the end actually just proves that the two lads never got in each other's faces about it, because Ward admits that he did once try to dislike Campbell, that he was once determined to avoid eye contact with him in the build-up to one of the few games where they were going head-to-head. As the players ran onto the pitch, Campbell appeared beside him and said, "Have a good one, Wardy." And Ward thought, how can you hate this guy?
Yeah.
But it's amazing, first of all, that a papal visit could be kept to page 2 of a newspaper.
I find that hard to believe.
Particularly the Irish press, which would be more into God than rugby, like, in terms of its, its demographic, like, So
they're mad about God.
It was the front of big sort of God readership there. So
Tony Ward was a God in his day.
And even if Dev was a rugby
maybe,
man,
but
it's bonkers. But it is also a reminder that when we had the very tortuous thing about 10 years ago, where every time Johnny Sexton scored a penalty, that you immediately cut to Ronan O'Gara in the stand, that it wasn't the first time that we'd had these titanic tussles over the number 10 jersey.
They say, he says, mercifully, this is when he was picked for the first test out in Australia, mercifully Campbell was sheltered from the outrage. No internet, no mobile phones, no social media. The only technology he possessed was a newly acquired Sony Walkman, the first commercially available personal stereo with earphones, kids, which had come on the market that year. He didn't phone home because to do so would have cost most of the allowance. He reckons it was about $10 a week, and so he stayed listening to his one tape of Billy Joel for the...
Yeah, and he also mentions that at that time, again, I mean, okay, some of this stuff about how rugby used to be has been done before, but all the players received beyond that, on the sort of allowance they received from the IRFU was some free boots and training gear. But Campbell recalling how the Adidas rep used to visit the team room on the eve of Five Nations games to whiten the 3 stripes on their boots.
Nice.
That's the glamour of that gig.
Yeah, there's a few other rugby pieces. I know Brendan Fanning caught somebody's eye. Neil Francis is writing about Israel Folau as well.
Yeah, and Neil Francis one, but we might talk about in a few minutes. But I just thought that Brendan Fanning's one was interesting, just because it points out just how low traditionally expectations would be about an Irish team travelling to Australia for a summer tour, particularly, as you point out, because we've lost the last 10 without even a consolation victory at all. He points out that in the term that we would use now, of course, is embedded, that in the weeks and months before professionalism in the last tour, summer 94, when he says a good number of the Irish squad snorkeled their way through swimming pools of drink, which just goes to show the level of preparation that used to go into touring squads back in the 90s. And it certainly is a massive contrast with the amount of preparation we would imagine Joe Schmidt putting in for a visiting tour that is now just trying to get used to the jet lag down there right now. And I was talking to some sports colleagues out in TV3 during the week on the day that Joey Carberry's move to Munster had been announced, and they were admitting that their total shock that when they tried to ask Joe Schmidt out at Carton House about Joey Carberry's move to Munster, that firstly Joe Schmidt said that he knew nothing about it, and that in fact this press conference was the first that he had learned that Joey Carberry was moving to Munster, which most of us would find desperately hard to believe. But also secondly, that when it was announced that Rory Best wasn't going to be travelling and that we would need to find a new touring captain, whether it would be Johnny Sexton or Peter Mahoney or anyone else, that Joe also professed that he hadn't given that topic much thought. And that just strikes all of us as exceptionally jarring, knowing Joe Schmidt's attention to detail and the fact that he hasn't really had much to keep himself busy since the tail end of March, and that knowing that really the next step towards making Ireland the genuine World Cup prospect would be to have a touring side at least win one game, if not a whole series, in the Southern Hemisphere. The idea that Joe Schmidt is trying to play down any level of preparation or acknowledgement is interesting, and you just wonder whether it's part of a bigger media game that he's actually trying not to let the train of enthusiasm run away too much. That yes, it's been a Grand Slam season, yes, Leinster have just won the double, but he doesn't want people to start suddenly thinking already that the Webb Ellis Cup is already sitting in an office in Lansdowne Road somewhere. No doubt. Neil Francis on page 10 has honed in on a very interesting dynamic and situation in Australian rugby at the moment surrounding Israel Folau.
fullback for Australia, a brilliant player, really brilliant player. So the situation in short is a couple of weeks ago, around the time Leinster were winning the European Cup, Folau, who's very religious, was asked for his opinion on homosexuals on Instagram. And Folau said that homosexuals would all burn in hell. As Francis says, quite a statement to make. And he looks at, the following match that Folau played in, at every break in play, the stadium DJ played YMCA by the Village People, belted it out. It was, as Francis, I have to say, very amusing. Folau could not but have noticed what was playing and why it was being played. Free speech has consequences. Francis himself says he was brought up in the Christian faith. I'm a births, deaths and marriages with Christmas thrown in type of Christian. I'm not even sure about hell. A Dante-like eternal pit of damnation, rivers of lava and devils sticking hot pokers in all your orifices. I'm sure they have my number anyway. Anyway, what's it they say? Heaven for the climate, hell for the company. He says Folau, looks into Folau. Folau is a member of the Assemblies of God Fellowship. And talks about him, in many respects, he says he's a model citizen if you looked at him in many ways, unfailingly polite, courteous, bright, articulate. If you park his comments and just, look at his conduct in other aspects of his life. So what seems to have happened is, obviously this blew up, this was a huge issue. And Folau met with the CEO of Australian Rugby. Folau basically said, look, if I'm damaging Australian rugby, these are my views. Like, that is a non-negotiable. This is what I think. And he said that he would walk away from his contract if he felt it was damaging rugby. He said, I talked with the CEO, said if she felt the situation was untenable and I was hurting Rugby Australia, its sponsors, Australian rugby community to such a degree that things couldn't be worked out, I would walk away from my contract immediately. And so the whole episode has polarised Australia, and Folau escaped sanction. And it's lurking away there. Francis points out that Michael Cheika, the coach, obviously has to deal with this. He says, Cheika, ever the pragmatist, was a beacon of common sense. So he was asked what message Folau's comments sent to a young gay rugby fan who idolises Folau. Cheika was talking on a Fox Sports programme, and he's talked about, they had a programme for kids which supports learning to detach, effectively, is the point. So he said self-belief, self-esteem, and if it's something that you don't agree with, you detach from that. That way it will be, he is no longer my idol, is Cheika's advice to young gay kids who might idolise Folau. And I mean, they've got David Pocock on the side, who's a humanist and environmentalist, and he's chained himself to gates before. It seems there's tension there with Pocock, because he famously refused to marry his girlfriend until there was marriage equality in Australia. And he's the captain of the side, a real inspirational figure in Australian rugby.
They clashed on social media. Where else? No,
it's a really well-written, interesting piece in many respects.
Yeah, it's quite thoughtful about the role of the Polynesian minorities as well, because I suppose there's a certain amount of commercial reality involved here for the Australian RFU as well. And he points out that there are around 225,000 people, Polynesians like Israel Folau, living in Australia. The vast majority of them are based in Sydney. A lot of them still live in fairly impoverished conditions. The majority of them are devout Christians who read their Bible every day and adhere to the teachings of their church, and sometimes a strong faith compensates for the lack of material goods that they have in the world. And I suppose it does go to show that, in fact, although it might not be in line with modern global liberal leanings, or that a lot of people would like that he wouldn't say these sorts of things, that he is actually representative of a fairly devout minority who are still a fairly integral part of Australian life, Australian culture, the Australian populace. And
is it appropriate for any rugby union to say to somebody with Israel Folau's views, we don't like those views, the majority of people don't like those views anymore, therefore you're not representing us? Where does free speech meet the right to play for, not the right to play, the privilege to play for your country? How do you balance free speech and that right?
I think it's a difficult one because, maybe it's in the sort of in a world where like athletes are on loads of money, and yet we speak about, do we want sports people to have a view on anything or not? Like that's the opinion that we face. And then if they have an opinion that a lot of people don't like, that we then say, shut up, you're a sportsman. And yet at other times, when maybe they come out with a view that's a little bit more populist, you know, we're like, yeah, we love this. But it's good to see a high-profile sportsman and a figure taking a stand. So, I mean, if you want to have an intelligent debate about something, you have to be open to someone whose view. Now, he didn't articulate his, the burning in hell stuff. I mean, okay, I think most people would agree that's sort of an outrageous thing to say. But if you
that is his literal belief.
I know, I know. But if you take that out of it, but the general idea that he should be allowed to express an opinion that he opposes, whatever it might be, as a sportsman, if you're willing to accept on the other side sports people with views that are deemed more favourable to like a popular view. I don't know. Like it's a difficult one, and I think the piece sort of teases it out. Neil Francis references the consequences of freedom of speech in Western society. Mentions Sonny Bill Williams, who's a Muslim convert, who, what happens if he's asked for his views on this topic when, I mean, he suggests that he hasn't been, because he's converted, his religion maybe forbids it. So, I don't know, it's a delicate one. And I do find the dressing room dynamic, which I wasn't aware of, I have to say, an interesting one, and yet they've obviously managed to sort of function
it's a hell of a backdrop to our issue being who replaces Roy Best as captain. We're going there in good fettle by comparison.
Well, I suppose that in a to put on my professional day job hat, I suppose that we've come a little bit close this week to having this whole situation where one part of the country is looking at the other as a basket of deplorables and vice versa, and that ultimately, democracies and pluralities all involve in people having varied opinions and having the right to profess and share those opinions and to talk them out, and so be it. I suppose the question really is, if you're given the privilege of wearing your country's colours, are you given that privilege on the basis of your personal beliefs, or are you done it because of what you can do on the pitch that you're playing on?
Yes.
And
that boils sometimes down the question very succinctly.
And sometimes you wonder that if people I've no doubt that there are players with similar positions.
The question is, do you have to tick both boxes?
Well,
so on the rugby front, he ticks that box. Us three sadly don't. But on the views box, does that come into it? He doesn't tick that box, I dare say. Most Australians are appalled at his comments. He stands by burn in hell. That's not...
unless you repent.
Unless you repent, yeah. He's not... he's speaking literally in his terms. That is his view. So, where do you set the standard? Do you have to tick both boxes to represent the country? Is the very difficult situation. Michael Cheika has clearly said, look...
No, just detach. If you don't like his opinions, ignore them.
Don't make him your hero. And Neil Francis does make the point, and I totally agree with this. And I just, we'll say this at least once every month on the pay-per-view. Why are we disappointed when? Well, sorry, I'll go back. Let me just grab this. Sports people are only vaguely aware of their responsibilities and obligations and are not there to be role models to anyone in the first instance. Very, very few superstars behave as society expects them to, nor do all sports people tick all the boxes. Why are we disappointed when they consistently fall short of society's aspirational standards?
Well, this is what I was going to get at, because now we have this situation where 20 or 30 years ago, somebody with Israel Folau's beliefs might have easily been lining out for the Wallabies a dozen times a year, and no one would have known because they didn't have this platform to suddenly espouse a personal view on anything that a random person on Instagram wants to inquire about. And is it the case, are we now going to decide that just because players have this individual platform and that direct accessibility with fans, that we now require them to aspire to certain legal or societal norms as well? Or are we going to demand complete adherence to, political ideology as well too, as the playing philosophy of the team? It strikes me as a really messy situation. If you're going to go down this route where you require everyone not to only to aspire to a standard on the pitch, but also to subscribe to the same political or moral ideology off the pitch as well.
Well, rugby had this sort of a different type of debate 20, 30 years ago with relation to apartheid South Africa, of course, and going to play there or not. So 40 years more so gone back.
I mean, the problem is that we do create heroes out of these people, who are quite often incredibly ordinary, have very ordinary views. In fact, maybe not even, don't have brilliant views on a lot of things because they've been so obsessed and had such tunnel vision to achieve what they've achieved in their own sport. And yet, the halo effect is such that we want their views on everything because they're good at doing X, Y, or Z. Padraig Harrington often said, just because I can hit a white ball around doesn't mean I know anything. And yet people ask my views all the time and stuff. They shouldn't care my views on this stuff.
You put that well, because a lot of the American golfers' views, wouldn't be, again, popular with a sort of
liberal types.
The liberal types, yeah, exactly.
Us Dublin media liberal types. Is that what you're saying, Dan?
That's that you put yourself in that bracket. So.
None of us are from Dublin.
Yeah.
None of us are actually from Dublin.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting backdrop. Frano does finish that piece by saying, "I hope to God I haven't offended anyone," because he definitely he teases it out.
He does
in detail, and it's one of the more different pieces in the paper today. So that's the rugby, broadly speaking. On the World Cup front, Dan, I know the piece Rob Draper did in the Mail caught your eye with some Argentinian World Cup winners.
Speaking of sort of controversial regimes going back in time, the World Cup is approaching, I guess, and particularly I think for like the English sort of journalists and so on, the football journalists, where now it's the time to roll out some of your World Cup features. And Rob Draper in the Mail has got himself over to Argentina to do an interview with 3 winners of the 1978 World Cup. Ozzy Ardiles and Mickey V are sort of quite well known because they came and played in England. The third member, the goalkeeper, Ubaldo Filial, I'm guessing with pronunciation, could be wrong, the Duck, as he was known at the time.
Turns out he's a legend.
Yeah, a legendary figure who, I mean, I suppose the headline on the piece is "Evil regime was killing people as we won the World Cup. Our fans blamed us, but we knew nothing." But the actual piece itself is a more broad history of the evolution of that Argentine team, tied in with the fact that it was a very controversial World Cup because Argentina was a military dictatorship at the time. Videla, who was, this was the time of the disappeared, and a World Cup that in some ways the legacy of it is a bit tainted by what was going on in the country at that time.
And so for people who aren't familiar, it's in the piece. What kind of things were going on? There obviously, I think 6,000 to 7,000 went missing.
Between 7,000 and 9,000 people, right, who basically just disappeared off the face of the planet because the ruler was a far-right dictator and they didn't agree with his...
He died in jail a couple of years, about 5 years ago.
He died in jail, and the point, I mean, there was various points that are made in the piece. That actually the coach of the team, Menotti, was more of a left-wing sort of socialist in terms of his political views.
Right.
In some ways, what the players are trying to say is that they were often blamed for years afterwards, even when they went on later in life, and when Argentina came out of that, and obviously there was a lot of grieving people left behind who were sort of victimised by that regime, that the players were told, well, you knew what was going on.
How could they not know what was going on?
Well, this is a point that...
Don't they have families and friends and people who would have mentioned it to them? No?
Yeah, I mean, this is to me, it's a bit like it's slightly different because it's a different type of thing, but it's a bit like the Colombian players all going to Escobar's house. How could you not know what they were doing? And it's a sort of a similar thing here. I mean, maybe they didn't know the extent of the detail, and it's clearly something that maybe sits uneasy with them, this great win that they had in the World Cup. Yet, 2002 I think it was, I think Phil Yall was coaching somewhere, and no, it was Ricky Villa, sorry, and he was managing Team Defensa in the game in Buenos Aires, an area that was quite affected by it, and all through the game they were shouting, "You son of a bitch, you are a murderer, killer."
Wow.
So that
team, because I know they visited the dictator's house after the World Cup win, they're viewed as very much in bed with him.
Basically agents of the state, effectively, even though their coach was actually one of the leading opponents. But what's interesting about it, and Dan has touched on it a bit there, this idea that they knew nothing about it, that they were just footballers, tunnel-visioned, looking at what was on the pitch and not really paying attention to what was going on beyond.
Sorry, look at even our hypocrisy here. So on the one hand, we're like talking about we can't expect the likes of Israel Folau or the people to have proper full worldly views. They're focused on their thing, like we're expecting too much of sports people.
Absolutely,
yes.
And now on the other hand, within 5 seconds...
this is tied in with the previous
discussion. We're saying, well, the team is 78.
It was actually just a really subtle segue, Joe.
Why were they not politically aware of what was going on?
What they did, this is the ironic thing, because it was the 1978 World Cup, which I think sometimes is often remembered not only for Argentina winning it and the ticker tape, but also the improvised minute silence that happened in the middle of a game once. Was that 1978?
Well, there was 78, and it's referred to as Peru. Like that's how Argentina got into the final by beating Peru 6-0.
Yes.
When the goalkeeper was born in Argentina, but the Sunday Times claim in 1986 that the Argentine government shipped grain, arms and released $50 million of frozen Peruvian assets before the game. Long story short, it was a goal difference situation.
Henry Kissinger was in the dressing room for some reason.
Yeah, Argentina needed to hammer Peru.
Sorry, I'm not following this.
The World Cup structure at the time was after the first original group stage, there was another group stage. So instead of having quarterfinals, semi-finals, the top 8 went into a Super 8 style
How
format.
boring is that?
And it did mean a lot of dead rubbers actually.
Games didn't kick off at the same time as well. So Brazil,
what it meant was that Argentina were only going to qualify for the final of their home tournament if they were to beat beat Peru by 4 clear goals.
Okay.
As it happens, the Peruvian goalkeeper was born in Argentina. Henry Kissinger and a few other international diplomats apparently showed up in the Peruvian dressing room before the game.
Including President Videla, the actual dictator himself.
Of Argentina.
Just nipped into the dressing room.
Before the game.
Showed up to the dressing room, and apparently a snap decision was made to ease different trade sanctions and to release international aid for Peru, and subsequently then Peru managed to go on and lose 6-0, thereby paving the way for Argentina to make it into the World Cup final. But anyway...
I'm convinced that nothing untoward happened, says Ardiles.
You're kidding.
So this is how, to fight against the fact that your win is sort of, the story is told in the context of Argentina's political situation at that time.
Yeah.
It's a difficult fight for those players, and it's clearly something, they've got the World Cup win, but they may always have that.
Well, if Ardiles is saying that, we knew nothing about the political situation, but then is also saying now, I'm convinced nothing untoward happened with the Peru game.
Yeah.
His credibility as a reliable witness is a little bit damaged.
And here's the other thing, and this is the crucial bit where the timeline collapses. This is the 1978 World Cup, and the whole way along, the testimony of these players that they knew nothing about the horrors that were being perpetrated, that they were seen as being complicit in by virtue of wearing the national jersey. Ricky Villa says the only glimmers of the horrors around him ironically came when they travelled out of the country in March 1977 for a friendly against Real Madrid. The press didn't talk about what was going on in Argentina at the time, Villa says. When we arrived one time in Madrid, we saw protesters with placards saying, "Something is wrong in Argentina. The World Cup is to cover that up. Los Desaparecidos, they disappeared." We were asking, is that true or is that not true? What are they talking about? This is a demonstration 15 months before the World Cup, in which it was made pretty clear to them that there was some pretty horrendous stuff going on in Argentina, and yet 15 months later, when they're playing and winning the World Cup, albeit in some nefarious circumstances, then they are apparently professing total ignorance for the horrors being perpetrated by the native government. So it doesn't quite tally that they would know about it, but yet not know about it.
So what are we asking them to do? Boycott their own World Cup? What could they have done?
Well, I suppose this is it. Is it more difficult to be, to resist the regime when you're, trying to represent the
What would the
nation?
consequences of that being for the players?
Unless they could just say in the interview, look, we played, we felt we had no choice, but we knew it was going on. But to say we had no idea it was going on seems unlikely. If they were in Spain 8 to 15 months beforehand, there's a demonstration. You presumably would have chatted to people in Spain. What's this about? You're saying about my home country?
But nonetheless, they seem to have had great crack as a general thing anyway, because obviously when Ozzy Ardiles then went to England and they would regularly ask him about his World Cups, and he would literally just plonk his medals down at the table and say, "Show me yours." And the piece, which is a great piece by Rob Draper, all in all, it concludes with Ricky Villa saying that he didn't get to play in the final and he was a bit annoyed about it, but he still, basically you're still a world champion if you've had any role in that you didn't play in the final. Ardiles has the final word. Even then you realise this isn't only for today, not only for the week, but for the rest of your life, he says, of the status of being a world champion. And he concludes, in fact, I would recommend it to you if you can do it. So his advice for life is, if you can be a world champion at something, you should give it a go, because it really opens a lot of doors.
Okay, interesting piece. I abandoned that piece halfway through. Maybe I just...
Not a mistake, Joe.
It sounds good, yeah.
Great read.
Yeah, okay.
Really good read.
I'll go back and have a look at it then. We're gone 5 minutes over time, so I don't think we'll get to Eamon Sweeney on Ramos, that we've had a lot of that this week, or Abramovich, David Walsh, Zidane. Sunday Business Post. In short, the Pro 14 CEO, Gavin, the Sunday Business Post, he's saying...
He says that his aspiration is to extend it to a Pro 16, but rather than going down the American route or maybe the German route, he's now closing off the idea of having an American franchise because the domestic league is now suddenly getting off its feet there, and he doesn't want to muddy the waters with that. He's suggesting that, in fact, there just might be room for 2 more South African teams because it works out with commuting schedules and TV times. So he aspires to have 2 more South African teams in it.
Right.
And the Ramos piece is basically that he's a prick.
You're not thrilled?
About the South Africans? Yeah. I mean, it's fine. I wouldn't say the contribution in year 1 has been all that exciting.
He also wants a second division and promotion relegation, which could make it a little bit more exciting.
That I'm in favour of. I think relegation could help that. Tournament no end.
He makes the point that having a sword hanging over your head means that Treviso had their best performance in a long time because they had something to chase, because they knew that they weren't guaranteed a ticket into the Champions Cup. Yeah. So when they actually had something to play for or a threat, that it actually brought on the performance. And maybe he's right. Maybe, yeah. We'll have to leave it there. Apologies, I knew time would get away from us there with everything. So Dan McDonnell from the Irish Independent, Gav Reilly, TV3's political correspondent, my thanks to you. We're taking a short break here,
And on the far side, they're about to throw in 25 minutes' time in Donecarney. Dave McIntyre will pick things up with Daithí Regan, who's standing by ahead of Dublin against Offaly.
Off the ball on News Talk. Tom Dunn.
1, 2, 1, woo!
This week on News Talk, I'm going to be counting down my 101 favourite songs of all time.